Hi, I'm Robert, and in this quick tutorial I will show you how you can add natural looking depth of field effects to your 3D renderings by using Adobe After Effects with some of my favorite plugins. Before we get started, I would like to point out that I am working on the BenQ PV3200 and it is a 4K screen, but I have set the screen to a different resolution just for this tutorial. So if you check out the resolution, you will see that it is set at the scaled resolution, so it works as a retina display. So it looks like it is 2560 times 1440 instead of the possible 3840 times 2160, which would be the 4K resolution. So normally I do work with this setting, but for the purpose of this tutorial, so that everything is actually recognizable in terms of buttons and font sizes in After Effects, I've chosen this resolution for this example. So let's get going, and I would like to explain how some of the effects, especially the depth of field effects for this project that we've just finished a couple months ago, were achieved. This was an opening title sequence for a design conference, and the idea was to make it look everything like it was filmed with a macro lens, so you're very close up to parts of a face, in this case the lips or the skin or the nose or the eyes. So we wanted to have a very shallow depth of field effect, so with a lot of blurred areas giving you this nice little bokeh effect. And so this was the plan, and I really like this effect. I do a lot of photography as well, and I love to photograph with a very shallow depth of field because it lets you basically focus on the areas where you set the focus on. So you can direct the attention of your audience and the viewer of where he or she should look at. So while I let this play, maybe I just quickly show you what I found when looking for example, for macro photography. So you can see that for macro photography you have a lot of depth of field, or actually very little depth of field. So you have a very shallow depth of field. So you have a certain area that is in focus and the rest is out of focus. So looking at depth of field, for example, shows you perfectly what I mean by this. So you have his feet in the focus and everything else is blurred. The same for this beautiful example here with text. So you're focusing on the word depth of field and everything else is out of focus. So this is actually pretty easy to be achieved with a proper camera and a proper lens. You just have to set the aperture right, and then you get that effect. And then what you will get is that nice looking blurriness, and this is actually called bokeh. So you can look up bokeh, and you should really find out how bokeh looks like, because it has some certain characteristics that I will also talk about in a few minutes. But these are like the things that we would like to achieve in our computer generated imagery, in this case this 3D face. So let's dive into After Effects, and I'll show you the general setup. So this is one of the shots, and you will see that there's a lot of depth of field going on, and we also have a focus pull. And you might be wondering why would I do this in After Effects instead of rendering it directly into Cinema 4D, for example. This is the 3D application that we use to render these shots. And of course you can render depth of field with a beautiful bokeh effect in Cinema 4D or in any other 3D tool, but then you're more or less locked onto that. So you cannot change the focus like here, for example. I'm changing the focus from focusing on the eye to focusing on the cheeks. And this was, I didn't plan on when and where I want to focus during the making of the shot. I just wanted to be flexible all the way to the end. And let me just quickly show you the 3D setup for this one. So you basically, the camera is facing here almost towards the nose, so it's facing from a downward angle. And if you play that, you will see how the camera moves, and also if I play that back here, you will see how the shot moves, and also the projection is moving. So this is the general setup of this shot, and I wanted to be flexible on where I put the focus. So the raw render is actually pretty straightforward. So if you look at the raw render, this is how it looks like. Okay, so it is a very almost like a black and white image, and all the the color grading and the look and everything basically is added in After Effects, simply because I love to be creative and flexible while doing post-production, compositing, and motion design work. So how do you get from something like this to something like this? Well, this is due to several effects that we have laid on top of this. But I will focus mostly on the depth of field effect here, and to be able to really direct the focus area, we need to have a depth mat. So what is a depth mat? Well, let me just show you. A depth mat looks something like this. Okay, so it's essentially a grayscale or a black and white image that has hopefully good nuances from all the way white to all the way black and some gray in between. And this depth channel allows you to specify a gray value that should be in focus at this given time. So this also means that you can transition from white to gray to have a focus pull, for example. So how do you get this type of layer into After Effects? Well, let's go back to C4D really quickly, and I have set up an example here. So here we will see the face that we have created with Daniel Henyes, and it's actually a 3D scan of a girl. So it's pretty high res. It's actually pretty crazy. You can go in all the way and you can see all the detail. So it's quite fun to work with this 3D model. But as you'll see, I have set up a camera here that I will be able to use. And if we go into the camera, you will see that the focus distance is set to 2,000 centimeters. Obviously, that is way too far. So let's set it to something like let's go with 30 or so. So we're almost there. Let's put it maybe at 35, so it's more or less at the eyes. So you can see that would be the focus distance. And then you have to go to details, and then you have to specify if you want to have a depth of field map front blur as well as a rear blur. So let's go ahead for the rear blur, and as soon as I check that, you will see that we have this dark green area which defines essentially how much depth of field nuances we're gonna have. So obviously this is way too far back, so I'm just gonna pull it back to maybe 50 centimeters, maybe even closer, make it 40 or maybe even 35. Actually, you know what, let me just make it down to even 19 or something like this. And now we have this, but how would that look like if we go into rendering this? So if you go into the render settings, and you will see that you have the save option, but you also have the multipass option, which is empty for now. So you have to define that you would like to have the depth pass. So you go in, and all the way down you have depth, and you just click on that, and then your render should have a depth pass. So as soon as I click on render, we will see what we will get. It takes a while to prepare this. So now you will see that we have like a grayscale for the ears, but more or less everything here is black, and this is due to the focus being on the eyes. So essentially everything from this eye level on is black, so everything is in focus. So in order to change that, for example, we can move the focus distance further back. Let's say maybe just at the nose, and if you render this again, you will see a little bit of a difference. So now you will see that all of a sudden the nose is in focus, so obviously everything that is black will be in focus, everything that is white will be out of focus, and everything that is gray is somewhere in between. And you can of course use that already as it is, but you can also go ahead and just make it 35 again, and go back to details and also add a front blur. So the front blur should be maybe at I don't know, 5 centimeters or so. And if you render this one, let's check out what happens now. So now you will see you have a almost interesting looking image with this grayscale image. So everything that is white again will be out of focus. Everything that is black is in focus. And obviously, if we choose a different value, for example, this dark gray where the eyeball would be, then of course these areas will be in focus as well. So this is how you essentially can create a depth map that you can use in After Effects. So you always have to make sure, if you render this in C4D, you have to make sure that you save everything down, save the regular image as well as the multipass image, and you can define as many multipasses as you want. You can have object channels and so on. But most importantly, for this specific effect that we're talking about now, is the depth effect and the depth pass. So make sure to activate that, and then you will have a depth pass. But of course, you can also change a lot of things in After Effects regarding the depth pass. So let's just take a quick look at the image again, and I've added a few layers here. I have already some of the look applied. So if I open this up, you will see I have some curves, I have some red giant mojo on it, I have some sapphire grain, and so on. So this gives the image a specific look that I would like to have. So if I turn this off, you will see how it looks without, and this is with. And I have specified an adjustment layer, and actually let me just do that again so you can see that. So I'm just going to go ahead to Layer, Adjustment Layer, and call it DOF, which stands for Depth of Field. So one of the mistakes that I personally did as well very early on when I was starting out my career was using the Gaussian or the fast blur to fake depth of field. And at first it might seem right, but technically it is really wrong, and actually it is as wrong as it can get. Because let's just apply fast blur for this one, and let me just click on repeat edge pixels, and I'm going to crank it up to 20 pixels. So you will see that you have something that looks, of course, blurry, but it doesn't look as nice as, for example, a depth of field effect would look like, or the proper bokeh. So how can you fix this? Well, you cannot fix it by using the Gaussian blur, even though there's a new Gaussian blur which is way faster. It looks a little bit different, so let's just check this out quickly. So you'll see the difference. So there's something already happening, but it's still not there yet. So what we should do is actually add the proper depth of field effect. So you can go to Effect and you can add Camera Lens Blur. So if you add Camera Lens Blur, you will instantly see that it looks completely different. So if I show you the before and after, you will see that all of a sudden the blurriness is there, but it has a certain shape. So you can crank it up. So let's put it up to 20. And now you can see there's a huge difference. So this is Gaussian blur, or actually I think this is even, well, I don't know if it's fast blur or Gaussian blur, it doesn't matter. But actually if you compare it to the proper lens blur, you will see that now you have those beautiful bokeh effects. So of course you can define them, and you can make them bigger and smaller, and you can also define the shape of them. So I love the hexagon effect, and this actually would resemble your aperture shape. So depending on what kind of aperture you would have in a real camera, this would define the shape that you have. So you can have an octagon. For photography, usually it is considered more beautiful. It is almost completely rounded, so that you almost don't see any edges. But for aesthetical reasons, I really like the hexagonal effect, and of course you can rotate the blur as well, and you can also give it some fringe at the edges. So let's just crank it up to really a high value like 50, and already you have a beautiful image. Let's make sure we repeat edge pixels so we don't have those black edges. And now you'll see that this image alone looks pretty cool. But in order to make it even more perfect, you should really look and study at bokeh. And if I quickly go back to this Wikipedia page and open up one of these images, you will see that there's actually a lot of things happening in the bokeh. So you have this sort of fringe, and you have this almost texture in the lights and in the bokeh itself. So it has his own specific characteristics that make it look realistic as well as nice. And of course you can change those effects here as well. You can crank up the fringe. Let's just go really strong so you can see the huge difference. Maybe even more. Now all of a sudden you can see that there's some edges appearing at those hexagonal shapes, and if we crank it even more up, it will become even more visible. So these are the things that you can add to make it look even more realistic. But as you'll notice now, we have applied the depth of field effect onto the whole layer as a general layer. So there's no real nuances from being something in focus to being out of focus. So how can we fix that? Well, if you remember, we just created a depth mat out of Cinema 4D, and I have placed this depth mat right here. So actually, you will see that here are the eyelashes, and here's, I think, part of the nose, and we would like to use that. So how can we use this? Well, you go in and you define the layer that has the blur and the depth information, which is this one in this case. And it doesn't have to be visible. You can just turn it off as well. After Effects and the plugin is picking out the information. So you can actually define now which areas should be in focus. So you can do a focus pull even after your render is done. And you can still be creative, and you can define that, oh, I want to have this specific area in focus. Everything else should be out of focus. So you are very, very flexible to the very end, even right before you have to render the final image. So this is actually really big creative freedom that you can have here to create the depth of field effect that you would like to have. So again, this is the camera lens blur, and this would be the Gaussian blur, which really doesn't look nice at all. However, I'm not using any of these plugins. I'm not using Camera Lens Blur since I have a personal favorite, which is from Frischluft, and it's called Depth of Field and Out of Focus. So there's a pack, it's called Lens Care, and I can add depth of field to that, and nothing happens because it's set to 0. And again, just as with the default plugin, which is the Camera Lens Blur, this comes standard in After Effects. You can define a depth layer, and then as soon as you've defined the depth layer, you can crank up the radius, and now you will see that you will have a very similar bokeh effect coming into the areas that are out of focus. And here you can also choose the depth and the focus area with this little picker tool. So you can actually click on any area, and this will choose this gray area of this particular map and will make it into focus. So for example, if you choose this gray area, then obviously these areas will be in focus, and everything that is more towards the camera will be out of focus. And there's another thing that you will notice, that the iris shape is actually with 3 facets and is rounded, so you will have this round looking bokeh effect, and of course you can change that. And I use values something like 6 and point 0.2 or maybe 0.1. And of course you can add some border thickness as well here, and you can really crank it up. Let's make it, I don't know, 70 or something, to make the effect stand out even more. And again, you can just keyframe that, so you can say I would like to have the depth at this area at the first frame, and maybe if I move on, I would like to have the focus on this area. So you will see that the focus will be shifting, and actually I think you can even try to move this. This takes obviously some time to render. It doesn't work in real time, but it is pretty fast, and it gives you the added benefit of being flexible all the way to the end. And again, to round it up, I've added a few more effects to this one. Particularly, I placed this one, I think, a little bit below some of the effects. So some other particle effects, for example, are more in focus. And I've also added a few extra particles that I'm blurring separately. So for example, this one has not the depth of field effect on it from Frischluft, but it has the Frischluft out of focus effect on it. The difference is, and let me just solo that really quickly and crank it up to 100% so you can see it a little bit better. This one has just the normal radius from 0 to whatever value you put in. So you cannot specify a depth channel, but it's just to blur the layer in general altogether. Obviously the other things are the same, so you can specify iris shape as well as any facets or border thickness attributes. So this is more like a simpler version of the depth of field effect. And again, if I toggle this on and off, you will see that I just have a few particles that are floating in space and corresponding to the camera. So it's actually doing the correct motion. But if I add the blur to them, they're all going to be blurred in general. So I don't worry about having proper depth to these, because they're just there to give it some atmosphere. and I think I've used a different transparency level. I think just that you can slightly see them, a value of 25, and these are adding to the realism on top of the general blur effect. But there's a few tricks that you can also do. I would like to quickly show you those. So for example, this is a shot where we do have a proper depth channel, but there might be some occasions where you either don't have the depth channel or don't have the time, or simply doesn't make sense to go the extra effort to create a depth channel. But let me show you how you can actually also fake a depth channel. So for this, I'm gonna create a new layer. Doesn't matter which color it is, and I'm just gonna add a ramp to this layer, and I'm just gonna go ahead and create a ramp that is going from left to right, from white to black, and I'm gonna pre-compose this, and I'm just gonna call this depth fake, or fake depth, and I'm gonna put it down here. So as you will see, essentially the original depth layer is also going from black to white, the other way around in this case, but it completely does not matter, as I will show you what you can achieve even with this very simple effect and trick. So I'm gonna go ahead and let me just maybe add a new adjustment layer, and then I'm gonna add the depth of field from Frischluft, and now I'm gonna crank it up to, let's say, 40 again. You will see that nothing is happening because the adjustment layer is just under the actual layer. So I'm just gonna move it up, and now you will see that you will have everything out of focus, everything completely blurred. But now if I choose my fake depth layer that has actually just a ramp, you will see all of a sudden, hey, you can specify any of those gray values to be within focus. So for example, you can also say I would like to focus on the eyelashes, maybe more towards this area. You can just simply do that. Why would you want to do this? Well, because sometimes if you're rendering the depth channel with anti-aliasing, obviously you then have areas where black and white is intersecting each other. You will have some gray pixels as well. And although I don't have this in this example, if I show you this one, you will see that it is without anti-aliasing. There still might be some issues because there's just so much fine detail and a pretty big difference in the gray value. So sometimes using just a simple ramp is also enough to create this depth effect. And again, you can crank it up to maybe 60, and still you will have a beautiful effect that has the nose and the forehead out of focus, but the section of the eyes in focus. And again, you can do just the same focus pull effect as you would do with the proper channel. And there's also another thing that you can do, and let me just pull up this original file from the title sequence here. And when I was working on this shot, I noticed that I didn't have any depth information here in the foreground. And if I show you how the actual depth layer looks like, you will see that this is what was used. And if we go into this one, you will see that the nose is coming in, and you can see there's a white little glow, what appears to be a glow. And I've just added this on top. So basically it's just a white layer with an ellipse mask, and this is heavily feathered, 150 pixels, and just this just gives you a nuance that you can add. So if you go into the shot, you will see that you have a lot more control over how much blur you're gonna have. So essentially these areas here are blurred and these areas here are blurred, and we just define a very fine and thin area that is within focus. So you can of course add certain layers and ramps to already existing depth layers. Essentially, there's no right and no wrong. Of course, physically, this might not be super accurate, but this is just for artistic and creative purposes, so it has to look nice. No one's going to ask if it's physically correct or if it's possible or not possible. I just wanted to make the image look nice and you can fake it with a lot of ramps and masking in the depth channel. So I really hope that this quick tutorial was helpful for your workflow. And if you want to achieve those beautiful bokeh effects, please go ahead and try it for yourself. I've added some light effects with optical flares here, as well as some volumetric lighting to make those rays so the projections look nice. Added some particles, obviously some chromatic aberrations and grain. But this would be another story and maybe another tutorial. But for now, I hope that you enjoyed this and have fun animating, and thank you for watching.